Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tranche 1, Phase 1 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry. My name is Jacqueline Purser, and I'm the Hearings Manager. For those of you in the virtual hearing room, please remember that unless you are invited to speak by the chairman, please switch off both your camera and microphone. I will now hand over to our chairman, Sir John Mitting, to formally start proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. We are now, I think, going to hear the opening statement of Dave Smith. Speaking directly to him, if I may I ask, first of all, if you have recovered from the attack of COVID that you had last week?
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm on the mend, thank you.
Of course, if at any time during the delivery of your statement you want a break, I will readily understand and agree to it without question. Please ask if you need to.
Thank you.
As you know, I had a hearing earlier in which I indicated that I would ask those who were otherwise minded to mention the real name of HN 104 Carlo Neri, whether they would undertake to me not to do so. And I understand that you've been told about that hearing and its outcome, and that you have been asked for such an undertaking. Am I right?
That's correct, yes.
Do you give me that undertaking?
Yes, I do.
I accept it. Please continue.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, my name's Dave Smith. I'm a blacklisted construction worker, and I'm a core participant in the union strand of the of this inquiry, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Blacklist Support Group, which is a campaign that was set up in 2009 after it was discovered that multinational construction companies were spying on us and blacklisting us because of our trade union activities. When we first talked about blacklisting as trade unionists, the authorities dismissed us as conspiracy theorists. Repeatedly, we were told that this doesn't happen in the UK, but blacklisting isn't a conspiracy theory, it's conspiracy fact. And it's a conspiracy of which not just multinational companies, but the police, political policing units that are part of this inquiry are colluded with. Trade unions first appeared in this country at the time of the Industrial Revolution and the British Empire. At the same time that the ruling class was making dynastic fortunes out of the slave trade, Parliament, the sole preserve of the rich and the wealthy at the time, was passing the Combinations Acts, which made being a member of a trade union illegal and against the law. And ever since that time, this colonial mindset, this anti-union hostility, which also sort of molds in with, mixes in with institutional racism and institutional sexism, has become part of, ingrained in the establishment mindset within the UK. My good friend Lord Hendy has already highlighted the case of the Tolpuddle martyrs in 1834. I don't really expect to go over that, but there was another less well-known example happened in the exact same year, which in 1834 there was a meeting of the master builders in Ludgate Hill in London, in which all of the major employers in the construction industry had a meeting and then decided that what they would introduce was this thing called a document. It's notorious within the trade union movement, where everyone applying to get a job on one of their building projects was forced, every craftsman was forced to sign this document to say that they would never become a member of a union. They weren't a member of a union, and if they were a member of a union, they were sacked or weren't given the job. And in a period before the welfare state, clearly, the impact of this on their families was destitution. Moving on from that, in 1919, an organisation called the Economic League was set up by captains of industry, ex-naval intelligence officers, and Conservative MPs. And in their own words, the purpose of the Economic League was to wage a crusade for capitalism. That was what it was. That's what they said it was for. But what it actually did, of course, was blacklist union activists, left-wing union activists, stop them getting jobs, not just in the construction industry, but across engineering, pharmaceuticals, the mining sector, the public sector, across whole swathe of the British economy. And from its inception, the Economic League had both formal and informal links with the police and the security services. The Economic League was closed down in the early 90s, and in 1993, Cullen McAlpine, a director of Sir Robert McAlpine Limited, bought part of the Economic League's Blacklist. And set up a new organisation called the Consulting Association, which carried on the work of blacklisting trade unionists in the construction sector. And the companies were involved in that were Balfour Beatty. 44 of the biggest construction companies in the UK were involved in it, but the biggest ones that are household names are the likes of Balfour Beatty, Lang O'Rourke, Costains, Skanska, Kiers, Vinci, BAM, AMEC, and AMI. This organisation, one of the ex-Economic League employees, Ian Kerr, was set up as the chief executive of the Consulting Association, and his job was to collate files on union activists like myself and like other core participants in this public inquiry. In 2009, the Information Commissioner's Office raided the offices of the Consulting Association and found files, secret files that the employers were keeping on union activists. And the files include people's name, their address, their national insurance number, sometimes their telephone number, their car registration number, photographs of themselves, sometimes their medical records, information about their families. Certainly, if people, once you were blacklisted, if you ended up getting elected as a shop steward, that would be reported on your blacklist file. If you were involved in a protest, or you complained about health and safety, that would be reported on your blacklist file. The Consulting Association didn't have spies on every single building site. What it had was main contacts, what they called main contacts from each of the major construction companies, very often at director level of the companies. And what would happen is a manager on a building site would feed up the information to the director would then feed the information into to Ian Kerr, who would put the information on the blacklist file. But they didn't just keep the blacklist files just for the sake of curiosity. What they used it for was to stop us getting work. So what would happen is any worker who applied to get a job on one of the building sites ran by these major construction firms would send in a list of names to the Consulting Association. Your name and your national insurance number would be checked against this centralised blacklist. And if it came up, if your name came up, you'd be sacked or refused work. And every time they checked a name, it cost £2.20. In the last set of invoices, Sir Robert McAlpine Limited, who built the Olympic Stadium, their last set of invoices was £28,000. This isn't managers having a chat. This is systematic, industry-wide blacklisting of union activists. The impact of this was that during the middle of building boom, when the economy was crying out for skilled labour, if it was a blacklisted construction worker, you couldn't get a job. When other workers were taking their kids to Disneyland, we were defaulting on our mortgages. You know, it was long periods of unemployment, which affected not just us, but our families. The wives of blacklisted workers have talked about getting 2 or 3 jobs in order to pay the bills. You know, not being able to send the kids on school trips, not being able to buy the kids trainers. One of the wives of a blacklisted worker has spoken about the decision that they took not to have a second child because of the financial hardships of being unemployed because of the blacklisting. I worked on the Jubilee line in the 1990s when they built the Jubilee line extension. I was a union safety rep on the Jubilee line. While I was there was a dispute about fire extinguishers and fire alarms not existing in London Bridge Station. A number of people who participated in that dispute ended up being put on the blacklist. Some of those workers who were blacklisted have committed suicide. I'm not saying blacklisting is the sole reason for their, you know, for that family tragedy, but it's absolutely clear that long periods of unemployment, that family disputes and tensions, which inevitably happened because of this, cannot be beneficial to somebody's mental health. You know, blacklisting has contributed to people dying, and not just people dying who are on the blacklist. I was a safety rep and I was dismissed numerous times, and those sackings are recorded in my blacklist file. If you've got a sector where safety reps who are supposed to be protected by law are repeatedly dismissed and actively sought out by the employers and dismissed because of their role of highlighting asbestos or unsafe electrical works, then that sends out a message to every other worker on that building site. If the safety rep can be sacked, then everybody else, if you want to complain about health and safety, you better keep your head down because you might lose your job as well. Blacklisting of safety reps is a contributory factor to the appalling death rate and fatality rate in the construction industry, which is historically the worst in any sector in the UK. Parliament was so outraged by the Consulting Association scandal when it broke that it introduced new legislation, the Blacklisting Regulations 2010. There was a select committee investigation into blacklisting that produced 7 separate reports, which called the blacklisting a real-life conspiracy. There was a High Court case which ended up being settled at the last minute, where the major employers paid considerable damages and made a public apology in the High Court. But, and this is the point, blacklisting and surveillance of us as union activists wasn't just carried out by the employers, it was also carried out by the police and the political policing units that are central to this public inquiry. Operation Hearn, which is the police's own internal investigation into this, has concluded, and I'll quote this, paragraph 4.2 of Operation Hearn says, police, including special branches and the security services, supplied information to the Blacklist, funded by the country's major construction firms, the Consulting Association and other agencies. Operation Hearn finds this allegation is proven. It goes on further and says in paragraph 13.1.2, special branches throughout the UK had direct contact with the Economic League, public authorities, private industry and the trade unions. At the very start of this inquiry, counsel for the inquiry made the following statement: the reporting of undercover officers refers to trade unions and to trade union activities of some union members. There are concerns about why such information was recorded, what it was used for, and in particular, whether it was passed to those who blacklisted workers. That is something that we can agree with the council for the inquiry on. We're very concerned about that. already in some of the disclosed documents for the inquiry, it shows that spying on left-wing union activists was part of what the SDS did, the Special Demonstration Group did. The 1972 building workers' strike and the 1972 miners' strike is mentioned in the SDS annual reports as an area that they were interested in gathering intelligence for. But SDS intelligence, how it worked was once the SDS gathered the intelligence, once the undercover officers gathered the intelligence, what it was done, it was placed on what is known as special branch registry files. You know, once the information was, once the intelligence gathered by the undercover officers was placed on a special branch registry file, this registry file became available to anybody within special branch, and as we've heard already from previous evidence, anyone from MI5 and the security service as well. The special branch registry files acted as like a central database, if you like, for information about spying on activists and also union activists. Lord Hendy has already, in his opening statement, highlighted a conference that was on the special branch registry files from 1970, in which various trade unions clearly have got individual files, individual special branch files about particular trade unions. I don't need to go over them all again, he's mentioned that. But not just particular individual trade unions, but specific industrial disputes had their own special branch files. The Shrewsbury Pickets, which I'll come back to later, the Pentonville Five, a group of dock workers who were sent to prison, the Conmec dispute, the Bryant Colours Works dispute. These are strikes that had their own special branch files, and even a rank and file union group called the Liaison Committee for the Defence of Trade Unions had its own special branch file. This inquiry will find that in 1970, Special Branch set up the Special Branch Industrial Unit. And to quote from Operation Hearn, the purpose of the industrial unit, the aim of it was monitoring of trade unionists from teaching to the docks. As well as that, the Special Branch Industrial Unit set up what they called a network of well-placed contacts within British industry. This included the directors of multinational companies, but also, according to True Spies, the True Spies documentary that has been referred to many times, included general secretaries of TUC-affiliated trade unions. The Special Branch Industrial Unit even had an official liaison officer with the Economic League. That's in Operation Hearn. All of the intelligence gathered by SDS undercover officers was available to the industrial unit, and the industrial unit was having meetings with these well-placed industry contacts, basically, and they're sharing two-way exchange of information. You know, this went on for a number of years. There's two, you know, both formal meetings and informal meetings. There is a considerable overlap between the work of, you know, the target groups of the Special Demonstration Squad and the Special Branch Industrial Units. And hardly surprising, some of the SDS officers, either before, you know, working for the SDS or after leaving the SDS, went on to work for the industrial unit. One of these officers gave evidence yesterday, which is HN 336. And in his evidence, HM 336 identified that the former head of C Squad of Special Branch, who we now know is Chief Superintendent Herbert Guy Lawrenson, known as Bert Lawrenson, the head of Special Branch C Squad at the exact same time that the SDS was set up, and who personally signed off some of the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign reports. When leaving Special Branch, he went off and joined and started working for the Economic League. Astonishingly, Operation Hearn, which was supposed to be looking into the links between Special Branch and the Economic League, does not mention the fact that Bert Lawrenson went off and worked for the Economic League. Operation Hearn does, however, mention that there's a dedicated liaison officer from the Special Branch Industrial Unit with the Economic League. You know, basically, you've got people in the industrial unit who Bert Lawrenson used to be their boss. Bert Lawrenson trains them. He then goes off and works for the Economic League, and you've got someone in the industrial unit who's the official liaison officer. There is a relationship there between the Economic League and Special Branch Industrial Unit that needs to be investigated by this inquiry. Sorry. As well as the Special Branch registry files, the political policing units in the UK have another centralised database of activists that they spy on, which is known as the National Domestic Extremism Database. Originally, it was set up and compiled by another police unit, the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, which is also one of the main units looked at by this inquiry. But another political policing unit was also responsible for collating and adding information to the National Domestic Extremist Database, and that was NETCU. NETCU stands for the National Extremism Tactical Coordination Unit, and they are also gathering information and adding it to the Domestic Extremism Database. The Domestic Extremism Database has information on thousands of British citizens, you know, a vast swathe of them who've committed no crime whatsoever. The NETCU, who were helping compiling it, the head of NETCU, the person in charge of NETCU, was Superintendent Steve Pearl at the time, and a few years ago he gave an interview to the Daily Telegraph, and I'll quote from the Daily Telegraph. He said, the purpose of NETCU was to take over MI5's covert role, watching groups such as the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, trade union activists, and left-wing journalists. In October 2008, Detective Chief Inspector Gordon Mills from NETCU gave a PowerPoint presentation to one of the secret meetings held by the Consulting Association. These Consulting Association meetings were held once every 3 months and were organised by its chief executive, Ian Kerr. Gordon Mills gave a PowerPoint presentation, which on the PowerPoint presentation flags up that left-wing activists could be emerging threats trying to get jobs with these construction companies, and that the construction companies needed strong vetting processes to ensure that these left-wing activists didn't get jobs on their companies. Bearing in mind, he was speaking to a meeting of the Blacklisting organisation that had been secret since 1993. I think they had a pretty strong vetting system in place already. Ian Kerr, the chief executive of the Consulting Association, gave a witness statement to the High Court trial. It was never used in a High Court trial because but I've got a copy of it, in which he said, and I quote, "NETCU wanted an output for their information. I gave them the email addresses of the contacts in the construction industry, and they would feed them the information." Both the Special Branch Industrial Unit and NETCU have now been disbanded. That doesn't mean to say that their work doesn't still exist. What's happened is the people working there have now been absorbed into SO15 at the Metropolitan Police. SO15 is Counter-Terrorism Command, and spying on trade unionists is now considered, it comes under counter-terrorism. The liaison element with industry context hasn't stopped either. The liaison element of the Special Branch Industrial Unit and NETCU carries on to this day by what is known as Operation Fairway, and forgive me, this is a bit of a mouthful, another group, another political policing group known as the National Domestic Extremism and Disorder Intelligence Unit Industrial Liaison Section. The inquiry will also find that in 2010, the National Coordinator for Special Branches suggested that special branches needed to be more proactive in giving special branch briefings to industry and academics. And I seriously have to ask, when an employer is brought to a briefing and special branch tells them about individual workers, activists that are on a domestic extremism database, seriously, what do they think is going to happen to us? Is it going to be neutral, or is the employer going to do something with that information? Clearly, it's affected us as blacklisted trade unionists, but equally, because they're giving this information to public authorities and to universities as well, it could affect other people who are not trade unionists about getting into university, access to university. It could also affect campaign groups and their funding streams, potentially, for fighting anti-racism that has been flagged up earlier on. I now want to move on and concentrate on the core participants in this inquiry, and three of the concentrating on three particular undercover police officers: Peter Francis, Mark Jenner, and the officer known as Carlo Neri. So, first of all, I start with Mark Jenner. I knew Mark Jenner back in the 1990s. When I knew him, his name was Mark Cassidy. He was a member of the construction union UCAT. He claimed to be a joiner, a carpenter. He was a member of Hackney branch of the construction union UCAT, which was my union. His union subs were paid by a bank account set up by a special branch. After attending meetings, this man attended meetings. We've been told by his partner at the time that after coming back from meetings, he would come back with pages and pages of handwritten notes, which would then be typed up from about what different people said at meetings. Mark Jenner also spied on a campaign group in East London called the Colin Roach Centre, which carried out multiple tasks. One of the organisations based at the Colin Roach Centre was the Hackney Trade Union Resource Centre, which meant that lots of trade union meetings took place at the centre, and lots of trade union campaign groups held their meetings at the centre. One of two small trade union groups that existed at the time at the centre was the Building Workers Safety Campaign and the Brian Higgins Defence Campaign. Mark Jenner didn't just attend these meetings. Some of the meetings, he chaired the meetings. We've actually got letters that the undercover police officer sent out to various different trade union branches across London, introducing himself as a construction worker fighting for safety on building sites, and trying to glean information from a variety of trade union branches in London at the time. Two of the core participants in this public inquiry, Brian Higgins and John Jones were both leading members of the two campaign groups that Mark Cassidy, Mark Jenner infiltrated. Both of them have got information about those campaign groups and about the Colin Roach Centre on their Blacklist files. Jenner, acting and posing as a trade union activist in the construction industry, also turned up on events organised by the Joint Sites Committee, which is a group that brings together trade union activists across various different unions in the London area. I remember him on a picket line in Waterloo about unpaid wages. I also remember him being particularly disruptive at meetings, if I'm honest. He also came into contact with other core participants at the time. Frank Smith, a core participant, is a bricklayer, heavily blacklisted since the 1990s, a UCAT branch secretary, and Steve Headley, also a core participant that appears on the who appears on the blacklist. Steve Headley is now the Assistant General Secretary of the RMT Rail Union, and Mark Cassidy, Mark Jenner was spying on us as well. At one point, the Colin Roach Centre and the Hackney Trade Union Resource Centre organised a trade union delegation to visit Northern Ireland as part of the peace process. At the time, Steve Headley was one of the people on that delegation, as was the undercover police officer Mark Cassidy, Mark Jenner, who actually attended that, and while he was there, stayed at Steve Headley's family home in Northern Ireland. I want to move on. Trade union activism isn't just about terms and conditions. It isn't just about wages and safety. Trade unions are also proud to be anti-fascists and anti-racists. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's something we're proud of, that we're opposed to fascism. In the period of these undercover officers' deployment, British National Party thugs and their paramilitary terrorist wing Combat 18 were terrorising the streets of East London. Racist attacks skyrocketed at the time. Family homes were being petrol bombed. Union offices were being attacked, including at the London Borough of Tower Hamlets, when the union offices there were smashed up, all the computers were smashed up and swastikas were daubed all over the walls. The increase in racial attacks coincided with the atrocious murders of Stephen Lawrence and Ricky Reel, which it just puts it in context about what was going on at the time, those tragedies. It's hardly surprising, therefore, that trade unions and labour movement campaigns, especially around election time, often asked for union people to come and steward their meetings against attacks from the fascist thugs, and trade unions from the construction industry were invited a lot to provide stewarding, to defend electioneering and outside counts and that kind of stuff. And some of the activists who are core participants in this group were part of those stewarding things, and one of the sort of ad hoc networks that we were talked about was called the Away Team. We were all spied on because of our involvement with the Away Team as well. Finishing with Mark Jenner, I just want to say one thing. For the record, we accuse Mark Jenner, and through Mark Jenner, the British state, of deliberately interfering with the internal democratic processes of an independent trade union. By covertly joining the union, by participating in debates within the union, by voting on motions that were sent to national conference and to the regional council, by participating in executive council elections, by actually distributing material, arguing for a UCAP convener to be sacked, and being disruptive in the meeting, causing a division within the union. That is how they have interfered with the democratic processes of an independent trade union. This is in direct contravention of international law that has been ratified by the UK, specifically ILO Convention 87 and the European Convention of Human Rights, Article 11. One more trade unionist I need to mention that Jenna spied on was, of course, Alison, who he had a 5-year relationship with, who's also a core participant in this inquiry. Alison was a National Union of Teacher activist during all this period. I'll let Alison, you've heard from Alison's lawyer already. When Jenna's deployment come to an end, another police officer turned up to spy on virtually the same activists, and this one was the officer that went under the name of Carl O'Neary. On more than one occasion, Carl O'Neary encouraged core participants, Frank Smith and Dan Gilman, and another trade union activist, Joe Batty, who hasn't been granted core participant status, to firebomb a charity shop. The undercover officer claimed that the charity shop was run by an Italian fascist by the name of Roberto Fiore, who was the leader of the Italian fascist party known as Forza Nuova, who was on the run from Italy after being wanted by the Italian police in connection with the Bologna train station bombing of 1980, where 85 innocent people were killed. For the record, we accuse Carl O'Neary of being an argent provocateur. He deliberately set out to entrap those trade union activists and to get them sent to prison. For the record, the trade union activists, these people are trade union activists and anti-racist campaigners. They completely refuse to have anything to do with it because they're not terrorists and never have been terrorists, despite how the undercover officer tried to entrap them. Carl O'Neary also had a long-term relationship with another core participant, or a number of core participants in this public inquiry, specifically a friend of mine, Donna McLean. Towards the end of the deployment, Carl O'Neary manufactured a split from Donna McLean, and when he claimed to be homeless, actually moved in with Steve Headley into his house as a lodger. In 2004, Steve Headley was dismissed because of a dispute on the Channel Tunnel rail link at the time, where there was a big campaign to get him reinstated, and Carl O'Neary, the undercover police officer, turned up on the picket line to spy on the union activists there, no doubt. There is a restriction order which says I am not allowed to use the real name of Carl O'Neary during this, during my opening statement. But I am allowed to say that I personally have known Carl O'Neary's real name for more than 5 years. As a group of activists and with the undercover research group, we found out that he was a police officer more than 5 years ago. When I published a book in 2016, we decided not to publish his real name out of respect for the family. But for the last 18 months, Carl O'Neary's real name has been in the public domain. Last week, I heard Rajiv Menon QC be told that he would be silenced if he asked a question that the chair to the inquiry did not like or did not think was appropriate. I'm not a Queen's Counsel. I'm a construction worker who's looking to get the truth for me and my friends about how we were spied on by the British state, but I will not be silenced. 4 weeks ago, I wrote an article for Tribune magazine about the bill going through Parliament at the moment, the Covert Human Intelligence Source bill, which would allow undercover officers in future complete immunity from prosecution for committing any crime, including rape, murder and torture. In order to highlight this, I cited Carlo Neri's incitement to commit arson as part of the article, and the article published Carlo Neri's real name. Neither I nor Tribune magazine, by publishing that, have breached the restriction order. But inside this inquiry, I'm not allowed to mention Carlo Neri's real name. This seemed, the public inquiry was set up to get to the truth and uncover what was going on. But inside the inquiry, I'm not allowed to mention it. On Sunday night, I watched BBC TV like millions of other people. I watched the Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials drama on TV. And actually coming into this public inquiry seems like stepping into an alternate universe. And just to be clear, it's the alternate universe that's a bit sinister, where the magisterium cling on to power by holding on to an outmoded view of the world, denying people to be able to see the truth, and deciding what people are allowed to know and what they're not allowed to know. I'll move on. The state did not just spy on us as trade unions. The evidence that was gathered, the intelligence that was gathered by the SDS officers was passed on to the Blacklist. I will give some examples. One glaring example comes from the deployment of Peter Francis during the early 1990s. Peter Francis has admitted that he was sent in. One of the people he was sent in to spy on was Frank Smith, the blacklisted core participant I've already mentioned, and his girlfriend at the time, Lisa Torsha. Peter Francis has admitted that he was the person who opened the special branch registry file on Frank Smith, and that there's information on the special branch registry file that talks about Frank Smith's role in the away team and his relationship with Lisa Torsha. Frank Smith's blacklist file from the Consultant Association, and I'll read it now, and I quote, says Frank Smith is under constant watch officially and considered to be politically dangerous. Peter Francis has said this virtually mirrors the language that is on his special branch file. What I would like to know, and what the core participants in the union strand would like to know, is how could the Blacklist organisation possibly know that Frank Smith was being spied on by the state and kept under surveillance by the state if that information wasn't provided by the security services and special branch somehow? Peter Francis also spied on and opened a file on Lisa Torsha. She was a leading figure in the anti-racist campaign Youth Against Racism in Europe. He was also tasked by the Home Office to look into Lisa Torsha's immigration status because she's an American citizen. And for 7 years during that period, Lisa Torsha's passport was taken from her and held by the Home Office while her that she went through an appeal because indefinite leave to remain was going to be removed. Lisa Teuscher describes that as traumatic at the time. What we also find is that Lisa Teuscher, despite never having worked in the construction industry ever, has got a Consultant Association blacklist file. And what does it say in the blacklist file? Two things. Number one, that she is the girlfriend of Frank Smith. And number two, that she's been involved in several marriages of convenience. Once again, virtually similar to the stuff that was reported that Peter Francis says he put on Lisa Teuscher's special branch file. Once again, we ask, how is it possible that a manager on a building site, who is the normal route of feeding up information to the blacklist files, would possibly know this? You know, this information has clearly come from special branch or the police somehow. Let me be clear. No one is suggesting that Peter Francis or any of the individual Special Demonstration Squad officers has personally handed over this information to the Consultant Association or the Economic League. That was not their job. The job of liaising with industry contacts was from the Special Branch Industrial Unit. That was their role, and NETCO, whose job was liaison with industry. It was through those mechanisms that the information got on to those processes, those meetings, that the information got onto the blacklist files. Another glaring example was that appears on a blacklist file is an incident in at the Cenotaph in 1999. Every year, the National Front lays a wreath at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday. That a racist and anti-Semitic organisation whose members have been involved in sort of fascist violence is allowed to lay a wreath at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday has always been controversial, but they do it every year. In 1999, there was a counter demonstration, and three core participants, Frank Smith, Dan Gilman and Steve Headley, participated in the counter demonstration. Operation Hearn has already admitted that their participation in the on that demonstration is reported and recorded on special branch files. Literally within days of it appearing on the special branch files, the same information also appears on their blacklist files. Once again, we're not suggesting that an individual police officer on the day passed over the information to the blacklist. This comes through liaison with industry contacts. The information about the Cenotaph and the information on Frank Smith's, Steve Headley's and Dan Gilman's information is recorded as coming from the company Costain. The main contacts for Costain, the construction company Costain, are known to have had relationships with special branch officers. I will name them: Dudley Barrett, who's now retired, and Gail Burton, who's now a senior executive on the working for the Jockey Club. The only possible plausible explanation for how the information about the Cenotaph incident ended up on the blacklist files is if someone from Special Branch told one of these Costain's managers that about it. That's the only possible way. Any other suggestion about how it got on there, quite honestly, is laughable. I keep coming. I'm going to come back to this. If the purpose of spying on us, which has been dressed up all the way through this, is to stop public disorder and serious criminality, then we've had 3 undercover police officers spying on us for over 10 years. Why were none of us arrested? Why have none of us been charged with these serious disorder offences that supposedly we were being spied on? That's because, in reality, police spying, the SDS spying, political policing in this country, that's what it's about. It's not about stopping public disorder. It's about spying on people that the British state consider to be inconvenient to them, and that means, you know, left-wing trade unionists. We accuse Special Branch Intelligence Unit, Industrial Unit, and NetCo of supplying information to the employers and to the Blacklist. The ideological mindset behind Special Branch spying on us as left-wing union activists and the Blacklist spying on us as left-wing trade union activists is absolutely identical. There's actually, we've got Special Branch people going off and working for the Economic League. The ideological mindset is identical. It's hardly surprising that they shared information with each other, despite what the designated lawyers said on the first couple of days. The police are not neutral in this. The British state is not neutral in any major dispute between big business and trade unions. The state is on the side of the major companies. The Special Demonstration Squad is not a rogue unit. The supplying of information to the Blacklist isn't some aberration. It's standard operating procedure for how the British state will work and link and liaise with big business. Core participants in this strand, demand to know what went on. We want to know the mechanics. We want to know the justification behind this. This isn't a trial. We expect a narrative verdict to explain what went on and how our information was passed on. There are 8 core participants in this public inquiry who've been spied on in the union strand, but we were not the only union members who were spied on by the undercover police. There are 7 million union members in the UK. To this day, we're still the biggest civil society voluntary organisations, and the police try and dress it up as, we were just spying on individual members, not trade unions. Being a trade union member isn't a business relationship, a contractual relationship with a union. The members are the union. That's how it works. We're not something separate. There's a saying in the trade union movement that an injury to one is an injury to all. It doesn't matter to us what someone's race is, what someone's gender is, what someone's class is, or what their political orientation is. If someone's in trouble, we help them. That's called solidarity. And 7 million trade union members, 7 million members of the British public want to know whether their union branches were infiltrated. They want to know whether information was passed on about their trade union reps. To dress it up as anything else, if they're spying on union members, they're spying on trade unions. To dress it up as anything else is complete smoke and mirrors. And there's an explicit requirement in the terms of reference for this public inquiry to look into what was done with the intelligence gathered by these SDS officers. Not just what they did when they were on deployment, but what happened with what the intelligence was used for afterwards. Yes, it's time for the police to come clean on this. Yes, we want to know the cover names of the undercover officers. Yes, we want to know the 1,000 groups that were spied on, but we want to know much more than that. Which other union members lost their jobs because of information passed on to them by police liaison officers. We want Special Branch Industrial Unit to name the key industrial contacts and the companies that were provided with information about trade union members. And if, as it said in the True Spies programme, if any of those key industrial members were union officials, the Blacklist Support Group wants the union officials to be named as well. In construction, we've found our blacklist. It's been discovered. But there are plenty of other blacklists as well. In the North Sea, there's a system called Not Required Back, which is effectively a blacklist for anyone who complains about safety in the North Sea. In the BBC, for many years, there was an MI5 officer actually literally based in the BBC buildings. They had something called a staff transfer register for left-wing activists, left-wing members who were working for the BBC. During the Thatcher period, there was a blacklist set up called the Subversion in Public Life blacklist, which was provided information by the security services. In the retail sector, there's a blacklist called the National Staff Dismissals Register, which was actually part funded by £1 million grant from the Home Office. We expect these to be looked into, you know, if the police have provided information. And just to be clear, in 2002, when the BBC documentary True Spies came out, one of the special branch officers in the programme talked about a blacklist, talked about special branch being given a list of names by Ford Motor Company at their Ford Howard plant factory in Liverpool, and I quote from basically for the special branch to check the names for when people are applying for jobs. And the officer says this, and I quote, "It was very, very important that trade unions were monitored. We were expected to check these lists. You can call it blacklisting, and that's what it was. In any war, there are going to be casualties." Seriously? In any war? This is a special branch officer. Like, you know, a trade union is meant to be the enemy within. You know, the Blacklist Support Group needs to know if any intelligence from any of these undercover units was passed on to any of these blacklists. And for the record, we don't think these are the only blacklists. We believe that blacklisting in some description takes place in every sector of the UK economy, but it's often hidden, as is the police involvement in it. I'm getting close to the end, believe. Another important aspect for us is about what happens to the undercover officers or the police spies after they left working for the police. I've already mentioned the head of C squad in Special Branch, Bert Lawrenson, who went off to work for the Economic League, but there are others. Assistant Chief Constable Anton Setchell, who was the head of UK political policing between 2004 and 2010. Upon retirement, he went off to work for Lang O'Rourke's as their head of security. Lang O'Rourke's was one of the blacklisting companies. Superintendent Steve Pearl, who I mentioned before from NETCO, he went off to work for a company called Agenda Security. Barry Gain, the deputy head of MI6, he went off to work for an organisation called Threat Response International. Both organisations, both companies that are engaged in spying on activists for corporate clients. Another company that spies on activists for corporate clients and employs ex-state spies is an organisation called Control Risks. It's been in the press that Control Risk had a £59,000 contract with Crossrail, a publicly funded body, to spy on union activists applying for work on that project. One of the activists spied on, his name was Frank Smith. Sorry, start again. One of the activists spied on was a shop steward, a Unites the Union shop steward called Frank Morris. He was the first ever shop steward elected on the project. Literally within days, he was sacked from the job. What we want to know is all of these ex-police spies and managers in these units who've gone off to work for the private sector, are they using their influence to garner information for their corporate role? But more than that, because of mass privatisation that has happened across the entire public sector, has state spying that was previously carried out by the police, has any of that been privatised? They've privatised the role of the army You know, we've got security contractors, privatised security contractors working in Iraq and Afghanistan. Has the British state privatised any of this state spying? Because if there is, who have they given the contracts to? How much taxpayers' money have they been getting? And are they exempt from freedom of information and public scrutiny? Because it's very difficult to say where that comes from. You know, for this to work, then we have to be skeptical, and we have to go, for this inquiry to work, we have to actually go in and find out this information. But unfortunately, you know, far from the police providing us with this information, every step of the way, they have stopped giving us information and tried to stop it. One of the core participants in this public inquiry in the Union Strand is an electrician called Steve Aitchison. Steve Aitchison stood on a picket line for 3 years up in Manchester, along with 2 other electricians, in order to expose the blacklist. Eventually, a whistleblower came forward and told us about the Consultant Association, gave a witness statement at Steve Aitchison's employment tribunal. It's Steve Aitchison and other activists in this inquiry who have exposed the blacklist and exposed what's going on with the undercover police, not the police. In fact, at every step of the way, the police have tried to stop the truth getting out. When the Blacklist Support Group first put in a complaint about police spying being provided to the blacklist, we put in a complaint in 2012. The Met Police refused to even accept the complaint, refused to accept it. It was only after an appeal by Imran Khan and partners that it was passed on to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and within a few days, the IPCC said it is likely that all special branches were involved in providing information about prospective employees. Almost immediately, Chief Constable Mick Creedon, who was in charge of the Hearn report, said that no such evidence exists. We now know this to be simply untrue. The evidence does exist. But once again, it's an example of how the police have tried to obstruct this inquiry. You know, another example is NetCoo. Come back to NetCoo. NetCoo was specifically set up, the organisation that gave the PowerPoint presentation at the Consultant Association meeting, that was specifically set up outside of the remit of the police. Even though everyone working in it was a serving police officer, even though it was funded by the Home Office, it was under the remit of the Association of Chief Police Officers, which means it's exempt from freedom of information requests. I've put in freedom of information requests to NetCoo to find out about the Woodstock, the meeting that that NetCoo gave to the Consultant Association. And we have been told repeatedly that no documents from NetCoo exist, that they have all been destroyed. This is a police unit that existed for 7 years, that the officers working in it had meetings with industry over a 7-year period. They produced reports, they sent emails, they sent correspondence, they did PowerPoint presentations, and we're meant to believe that not a single document exists. That NetCoo has now been subsumed into the Metropolitan Police, but we're meant to believe that all of these documents have now been destroyed, and not one of them was worthy of carrying over to what were these police officers doing for 7 years, if not one of the documents was worth carrying over. When we're told that all of these documents have been destroyed and none of them exist anymore, I'll go out on a limb and say that is a blatant lie. We are being lied to. That some of these documents still exist, and some of these documents are still being accessed by the police now. Now, we've got a choice here. We either believe that the police are capable of lying, or we've got to believe that everything the police tell us is absolutely the truth. You know, ask the families of the football fans who died at Hillsborough. Ask the miners who were falsely imprisoned at Algrave. Ask the Birmingham Six whether the police lie. Okay, the police lower. This is not name calling like the lawyers for the Metropolitan Police Service suggested at the beginning. These are political policing units that we are being investigated during this public inquiry. You know, these police units lie, they've been trained to lie. For, you know, this inquiry needs to be sceptical about this. Unfortunately, the scepticism, the benefit of the doubt seems to be given to the police time and time again. We've been told by the police that throughout its 40 years of this investigation, only one police officer actually joined a trade union, was a member of a trade union. We had a meeting in 2018 with the inquiry team, and you, the chair, reinforced this, that the police had said that only one police officer during the entire 40-year period had actually joined a trade union. Look, I'm not a lawyer, but I imagine that when barristers, you know, meet each other at a social event, that they talk to each other about what, you know, what chambers they went, you know, they're at, or what posh school they went to. In the trade union movement, we don't do that. In the labour movement, we talk to each other and we ask each other which union you're a member of. Any undercover police officer who was spying on any kind of long-term deployment, who was spying on union activists, who wasn't a member of a trade union, would stick out like a sore thumb. You know, so, you know, I do not for 1 minute believe that there's only one police officer in this inquiry that joined a trade union. The other thing is to do with our police files. All of the core participants, you know, we wouldn't be core participants unless the police had told us that we were spied on and that we had police files. I have applied to get a copy of my police file, and like other core participants, I've been told the police can neither confirm nor deny whether they hold any information on me, not just about me, but even about the Blacklist support group. They can neither confirm nor deny whether they hold any information on us. And the reason they give is national security. So much for transparency. So much for transparency. We had a meeting with you as the chair of this inquiry in July 2018. And during that meeting, we specifically asked if two core participants, Brian Higgins and John Jones, could be provided with their police files, because both of them were seriously ill, and both of them are in their late 70s. And we were given assurances that as much as physically possible, that would be handed over to those people. 2 years later, those files, police files, have still not been handed over to John Jones and Brian Higgins. Brian Higgins passed away in June 2019. Seriously, what possible national security threat can there be that a dying man isn't allowed to see a copy of a file that the police produced on him, wrote about him in the 1990s? I am in touch with Brian Higgins' family, and I'm putting it politely by saying that they're not very happy with the way that they've been treated, either by the police or by this inquiry. Those are not the only documents that the Blacklist support group haven't been allowed to see. The only evidence from Tranche 1 that we've been disclosed to us so far are the Special Demonstration Squad annual reports and the Operation Hearn investigation. This inquiry starts in 1968. Blacklisted workers, represented by the Blacklist support group, have got files that go back to the early 1960s. There are, you know, so we feel we're entitled to see these documents, but the only ones we've seen are Operation Hearn and the SDS reports. Just quickly want to mention Operation Hearn if they're going to be core documents in this inquiry. Operation Hearn was the internal investigation set up by the police to look into allegations that they supplied information to the Blacklist. What is noticeable in it is the use of language. all the way through it, it talks about alleged victimisation, supposed blacklisting that was going on. This is despite the fact that the officers compiling it had full access to the full Consulting Association blacklist database, despite the fact that Parliament passed legislation directly because of this blacklist, despite the fact there's been numerous employment tribunals where the written judgment condemned the blacklist, and there was a High Court trial in which all of the employers admit doing it and have made a public apology. There are 74 appendices in the Operation Hearn, including an interview with the Special Branch Liaison Officer with the Economic League. The Blacklist Support Group hasn't been shown any of those appendices whatsoever. All we've got is a heavily redacted version of the report. What I will say, because it'd be rude of me not to, is thank you very much to the officers, because one of the things that they do highlight is that the book that myself and investigative journalist Phil Chamberlain wrote and published in 2015, the police describe it as the most comprehensive collection of material on the subject. Thanks very much. We'll be using that in our marketing from now on. But what it also demonstrates is that testimony from the activists, what the activists have found out is going to be just as comprehensive as the stuff that the police have found out. And actually the activist testimony should be given just as much, if not more weight than the police. I'm literally in the final furlong, so forgive me. In addition, you've got the SDS annual reports. Now look, we've seen these annual reports. We're meant to see these as like key evidence in these in this inquiry. I'm a shareholder in various blacklisted construction companies, and every year I get sent an annual report when it comes up to their AGM. And what it does is it tells you what the company's been up to, where they're earning money, where they're, where around the world they've been involved. But I'll tell you what it never mentions. It never mentions how many fatalities they've had on their building sites. It never mentions when they've been prosecuted for human rights abuse or when they've been prosecuted for health and safety violations. Not once have I seen it mentioned that they were involved in blacklisting or they paid out millions of pounds at a High Court trial or did a public apology. And I don't expect it to, because what that document is, what the annual report for the corporations are PR exercises to give them to shareholders to make sure they've got a guaranteed funding stream to carry on in the future. And that's what the SDS reports are as well. They're PR exercises sent to people who are going to provide the SDS money in the future, and they should be viewed in exactly the same way. They are not a full and transparent review of what the SDS actually got up to during that period. Having said that, even the heavily redacted versions we have got do flag up that there's information relevant to trade unionists and the union strand. One of the things that they identify is that one of the organisations infiltrated by the SDS was the Shrewsbury 2 defence campaign. The Shrewsbury 2 was a campaign related to the Des Warren and Ricky Tomlinson, the Shrewsbury pickets who were sent to prison after the 1972 construction workers' strike. Notorious miscarriage of justice in which the police and the security services colluded to get these 2 construction workers sent to prison. 50 years after the case, more than 50 years after the case, the Home Secretary still refuses to release the government files relating to the Shrewsbury pickets because of national security reasons. This is screaming of a establishment cover-up, absolutely screaming of it. One of the blacklisted workers who used to speak on behalf of the Blacklist Support Group, his name was Mick Abbott. he was a scaffolder. His blacklist file starts in 1964. He was one of the key leading members of the Shrewsbury 2 defence campaign, and his blacklist file is covered with information relating to his campaigning on behalf of the Shrewsbury 2. If the police were spying on the Shrewsbury 2 defence campaign, it's almost implausible that they weren't spying on Mick Abbott. Mick Abbott also passed away. He passed away in 2014. So once again, we'll never know. The other thing that the annual reports mention is the 1972 construction workers' strike, building workers' strike, being an important element of what the SDS were interested in at that point. The blacklisted workers from that period, they're literally the people who led the dispute. They are, their blacklist files are covered with stuff relating to the 1972 builder strike. It's implausible that if the SDS was spying on the building workers strike in 1972, that the blacklisted workers that we represent were not spied on as well. As it is at the moment, the Blacklist Support Group has been denied access to all of the Tranche 1 evidence, which also means that our lawyers haven't been able to ask questions of any of the other witnesses. Far from being transparent and getting to the truth, what we've got in this public inquiry so far are barriers. What we've got at the moment are restrictions. I've, as you're aware, I've tested positive for COVID. The only way I can see the public, the only way it's possible to view what's going on in this inquiry is to register my that I want to come and see it online. If I'm selected, I have to travel during a COVID lockdown to a hotel in London to watch the inquiry via a TV screen, something that I cannot do. When the police officers are giving oral evidence, you can't even see that. What we've got is some kind of, it's like going back to the 80s, got a CFAX, watching the inquiry via CFAX, where you've got a typed transcript coming up, which literally doesn't work. It doesn't work. And if, rather than taking my word for it, let's take the Home Affairs correspondent for the BBC, who's the lead correspondent for the BBC for this public inquiry, Dominic Cassiani, who has tweeted the following, and I quote, relating to the live transcript, which is the only way supposedly to follow it. This is what the chief correspondent for the public inquiry for the state broadcaster says. It is virtually unusable for reporters trying to follow it remotely. The words are appearing via a fast-scrolling video feed that can't be paused or can't be rewound. This basically means, from a practical perspective as a working reporter, that a public inquiry becomes largely impossible to report. In the last few days, I've heard you, Chair, state at the beginning of the hearings that members of the public are entitled to hear the same public evidence as I will hear, and you're entitled to reach your own conclusions about it. I say simply, in all practical senses, that's not true. Most people find out what's going on from the public inquiry from the media. Even if I wanted to, I can't go to this hotel and find out this because of the restrictions that you as the chair have imposed. It would be easy to allow the public, a simple thing would allow the public to be able to follow this and for the media to be able to report it properly. And that would be to live stream all of the evidence. That is what is happening in the Grenfell Tower public inquiry at the moment, but that is not what's happening in this public inquiry. From where I'm standing at the moment, instead of being transparent and open, what this looks like is we're watching a good old-fashioned establishment cover-up unfolding before our eyes. In conclusion, this is my last my last paragraph or so. Blacklisted workers our experience of the British legal system doesn't give us optimism that the British state investigating wrongdoings of the British state is necessarily going to come up with justice. 700 blacklisted workers were claiming in trial, and the multinational companies were literally allowed to buy themselves out of a trial. That is not justice. We do not expect this public inquiry to provide justice. Our participation in this inquiry is with a slim hope that through the process, more and more evidence will become uncovered, that will come to light about the anti-union hostility of the upper echelons of the British secret political policing units. They have a mindset which is still back in that colonial period mindset, which, and institutional racism, institutional sexism, working class hostility to trade unions. We do not expect justice. Our participation is we will shake the tree as much as possible and see what comes out. We want to expose what these police units have been doing in the name of the British taxpayer so that it's exposed. Keeping it hidden does nothing for justice, but also does nothing for the British public, who are meant to be reassured after we get to the truth in this. The police lawyers will argue that the undercover police officers were doing what they were doing in order to protect democracy. When they're spying on trade unionists, when they're providing information to blacklist organisations to stop trade union activists getting jobs, that is not defending democracy. That is defending big business and capitalism. And for the avoidance of all doubt, capitalism and democracy are not the same thing. Thank you. I'd just like to send solidarity greetings to all of the other core, non-state, non-police core participants. It's been an honour working alongside you for the last few years, and an injury to one is an injury to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm delighted to see that you are in, I don't know your state of health, but in full vigour.
Thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to go over my time a bit. I apologise.
Not at all. We will resume at 22 with the procedural hearing, in which I'm going to hear submissions from counsel for two of the non-state core participant side, and which will also be attended by the Metropolitan Police lawyers and the designated lawyers. 20 to 12. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We will now take a short break until 20 to 12. Please can you move into your breakout rooms? Welcome back, everyone. I will now hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Can I ensure, first of all, please, that everybody who needs to be here is here? Ms. Brander?
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Mr. Menon?
Yes, I'm here too, sir.
Mr. Sanders?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Skelton?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good. I asked all of you to appear. Well, I asked Ms. Brander and Ms. Menon to appear, and your presence, Mr. Skelton and Mr. Sanders, is also necessary to consider what Ms. Brander said to me about the participation of non-state core participants in our evidential hearings. She stated, and I am delighted to accept, that those that she represents and the non-state core participant group more widely do wish to participate actively and constructively in the hearings. And I want to try and see if there is a means by which they can do it. I therefore want to go rather more widely than Ms. Brander's written, helpful written document that she submitted before this hearing. And to begin, if I may, by asking everybody whether it would now be sensible to resume ordinary procedural hearings, that's to say, procedural hearings at which all necessary parties were represented, which were conducted in the usual way, albeit perhaps nowadays over television screens, with everybody having their say in the presence of everybody else, and thereby assisting me to get to a sensible solution. Ms. Brander, is that something that you would welcome?
Well, sir, I perhaps need to understand a little more about what you're proposing. When you were talking about ordinary proceedings, I thought perhaps you were talking about in a physical courtroom, which would seem maybe wouldn't facilitate access for more people than are already able to attend the hearing rooms at the Amber Hotel. You then mentioned television screens, so I'm not sure then whether you're talking about allowing those who have core participant status to have a live link to the proceedings. If it's the latter, that is certainly something that we would support.
Let me explain myself a bit more clearly. I was hoping not to have to go into ancient history, but here I go. When we had the original anonymity open hearings, I had hoped that they would eventually smoothly become procedural hearings, so that we would have traditional proceeding hearings long before the COVID troubles in a largish courtroom or hearing room at which everybody would express their views. I would be able to test them, and I would then produce at the end of them a written decision. Unfortunately, when the open anonymity hearings came to an end for reasons which we're all aware of, and I won't repeat, I decided that we should proceed as we did by having face-to-face meetings between the inquiry's lawyers and the representatives of all sides, but as it were, bilateral meetings rather than a meeting at which everybody was present. That has, up to now, worked, albeit, I think, with increasing difficulty. Now that we've started hearings, it seemed to me to be the moment at which I would invite everybody to reconsider whether it would be a good idea to have, to use the old Latin phrase, inter partes, oral procedural hearings about the evidential hearings were conducted and other matters that arise as we go forward. I wanted, first of all, to know from your side, because it was, after all, the actions of non-state core participants who precipitated the route we've gone down up to now, whether that is a good idea or not, whether it's something that would be welcomed or not.
Well, certainly, sir. My understanding from correspondence between Lydia D'Agostino, the RLR, on behalf of the non-state core participant cooperating group and solicitors of the inquiry, was that it was anticipated that there might be, or that there would be, an inter-parties procedural hearing after the end of phase 1 of tranche 1 and before the commencement of phase 2, in order that the issues that have been raised in this phase could be considered by you, sir. And certainly if that's what you're contemplating, then that is very much something that the non-state core participants would wish to happen. You've heard from Mr. Smith this morning about the strength of feeling about how the first phase has gone, and there are certainly many issues that we would wish to have the opportunity to address you on and for you to consider.
Thank you. It is my intention that there should be an inter-parties procedural hearing about phase 2, and that should take place towards the end of January next year. Can I explain that the earliest date on which we may be able to begin phase 2 is the middle of March. That may be optimistic, but as Mr. Barr said, it's our intention to start phase 2 in March or April. And if an inter-parties hearing is possible before the end of January, then it can not only inform how we're going to conduct the hearings, but will permit us to put things in place, technical means in place to do so. I'm encouraged by what you say, and I hope that your remarks are not confined just to the next stage, as it were, but can help or can inform how we proceed for subsequent tranches. Have I understood you right?
Well, so I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, and all I can say is to repeat what you heard from Mr. Smith this morning about the strength of feeling. Certainly, the core participants want to participate. They are desperate to participate, so they very much welcome the opportunity to do so at procedural hearing. What will happen in the future obviously depends on the way things progress, so I can't really say more than that, but certainly for now they very much want to have the opportunity to address you on the way in which the inquiry is conducted going forwards. Yes,
and to help determine how hearings are going to take place, because we are all learning from experience. It's easily the best teacher, and you can advance all sorts of theoretical arguments before things actually start. Once they get going, you see what the problems are, and one can sometimes see what the solutions are. May I ask Mr. Menon if there's anything that he wants to add to what has just been said in that exchange?
Sir, you will appreciate that having just been alerted to your question, I'm unable to speak on instructions, but for my part, I think that that resuming procedural hearings at which all core participants can raise issues with you of concern, whether they be about Rule 10 or whether they be about redactions to the papers or other procedural matters, would be welcome. I think part of the difficulty since those hearings stopped is that one has had to effectively engage in email communication, either on a solicitor-to-solicitor basis or on a counsel-to-counsel basis. And then you are obviously alerted as to when a ruling or a view is required. But procedural hearings, clearly, where everybody has the opportunity to speak, will increase dialogue, and in those circumstances, I would think would be welcomed.
Thank you. Mr. Skelton?
Yes, sir. I think the NPS endorses the approach of having hearings in which anyone can make submissions about matters which affect their interest and which they ought fairly to be heard upon, and really to approximate your hearings as close as possible to what they would have been like had you been able to sit at Pocock Street and issues had arisen like Miss Brander's application while the hearing was going on, and we could all reconvene in front of you in the chamber as we would ordinarily. So yes, inevitably there will still be the need for some bilateral hearings about safety or security issues or applications that necessarily need to be private, but matters like this, which affect everybody, yes.
Sanders?
Yes, so we'd agree with that. I think a transparent inter-parties approach is preferable to a series of bilateral communications, because each party to those bilateral communications isn't aware of what's being said in the other dialogues. And so the more we can do all together, the better.
Thank you. Then for once, there is happy unanimity. And I don't anticipate that those who aren't at this hearing would express a dissenting view. Very well, then we will begin with a quote ordinary, close quote, procedural hearing, inevitably via television link, sometimes towards the end of January, about how we're going to hear the next phase of tranche 1. Can I now turn to the narrower issue of Rule 10? And here I want, first of all, to address Ms. Brander and Mr. Menon. I think I ought to address my remarks to you, Mr. Menon, first, because I regret to say that part of what I have to say is critical. The purpose of Rule 10 is to enable the inquiry to control proceedings in a manner that is both useful to its purposes and lawful. And I regret to say that the re-examination you conducted of Tariq Ali and the cross-examination you conducted of the two officers illustrated in some part how we can't proceed. Can I first of all deal with Mr. Ali? You asked him a question that, when he answered it, breached a restriction order. No ill will was intended, obviously. As I understand it, you don't know that the person who was named is dead. He may or may not be. I don't know what your source of information is. The inquiry doesn't know either way. If he is alive, then his rights under the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act would have been infringed. An inquiry is not a court. It doesn't have unfettered, unrestricted opportunities to explore every issue that an advocate might consider to be relevant. It has statutory limits upon what it can do, and I must try to uphold restriction orders that have been made and people's rights under legislation such as the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. The next avenue of questioning, which was not harmful but not helpful, was your questioning about the vote that had taken place, at which the officer said he'd voted with his colleagues, if he had voted, who supported the ad hoc committee's line about the route that the march should take. No harm was done by that at all, but equally no purpose was served by it. The third question is something which may or may not give rise to harm. Whether it does is beyond your knowledge and mine. You asked about Helen Crampton. My understanding is that her name is now blazoned over the social media sphere. And you asked about a relationship that you suggested she may have had with a man who may or may not be alive, but who is probably dead, George Cochrane. I don't know, and the inquiry team doesn't know, the basis upon which you sought to raise that question with Joan Hillier. And I'm afraid the inquiry has got to proceed on the basis of participants telling it what they know or what they believe they know and the basis for it, rather than, as it were, it coming out without significant advance warning by conventional courtroom questioning. I don't mean those observations discourteously, but I'm afraid I have to make them because it does show what the inquiry cannot allow to happen. This is an inquiry, not a trial, and the processes of an inquiry must be followed. I will give you the opportunity to respond to what I've said, obviously. If you require time to reflect upon it before doing so, I will gladly give it to you.
I'm happy to respond straight away, sir, if I may.
Yes.
Can I address each of those three discrete issues one by one, please? In relation to my questioning of Tariq Ali and the specific topic that you've raised, just to put it in context for those who didn't hear or see the evidence last Wednesday that Tariq Ali gave, he was asked by counsel to the inquiry about a particular meeting that took place at the Notting Hill branch of the VSC. And an intelligence report in respect of that meeting was put on the screen for him to comment on. And the name of a particular individual who was said to have been distributing a leaflet at that meeting was redacted. And he was asked about that and he couldn't assist because he wasn't told the name and effectively he wasn't at the meeting and he had nothing of any evidential value to offer in respect of that. I knew the name of that individual because on receipt of the papers from the inquiry and having conducted further investigations, we knew who that individual was. And I wrongly believed at the time, and you know this because I've emailed your legal team to inform them of my mistake, that I wrongly believed at the time that he was deceased. And I'm truly sorry for having made that assumption. I took it on good faith from a wholly reliable source, but unfortunately an innocent mistake was made, and that man is very much alive. And that was the sole reason that I mentioned his name in the questioning, was one, because I believed he was dead, and two, that I was trying to trigger a recollection in Mr. Ali, which in fact I did, because he did recognize the name. But if I'd known he was alive, I would not have mentioned his name, and I've apologized for that, and I hope you accept that apology from me. It was a genuine mistake made on wrong information. And so I accept that if I'd known he was alive, given there was a privacy redaction in respect of his name, I shouldn't have mentioned it. So that was the context in which I mentioned that. Having then discovered that he was alive, me and my teams took steps to further investigate that matter. And those steps are ongoing. And that is why when you asked me prior to my questioning of Joan Hillier what the basis of my proposed questions were, I was as vague as I was, because it effectively was hot off the press, if I can put it that way. And it demonstrates, I think, in a very graphic way, what happens when the lawyers for the non-state core participants are given disclosure as late as we were. We had literally 4 weeks to prepare our opening statements, read 5,500 pages of evidence, and propose our questions for the relevant police witnesses. It was a very cumbersome task. I mean, if we'd had this material months in advance, as we have repeatedly suggested and submitted that we should have had, this would never have arisen. I'm confident of that. But when one is working against the clock in this way, it is much more difficult to avoid problems of this kind. So I regret mentioning his name. I hope you accept from me that I did so because of an innocent mistake on my part. And I wouldn't have done so if I'd known that he was alive. Turning.
Forgive me for interrupting you, because I know you're going to turn to the next topic. May I say that I unhesitatingly, and of course, accept your apology and explanation as to how it happened. I'll return to late disclosure later, which is a distinct topic.
Understood. Turning to my questioning in relation to, I think it was the witness with the cover name John Graham, in relation to the meeting that 9 undercover police officers attended, and where there was a vote in relation to the route to be taken by the October 1968 march. In my submission, it was a relevant topic, sir, to explore with anybody who attended that meeting, because notwithstanding the fact that 9 police officers could not have affected the outcome of the vote, given the number of people at the meeting, surely it's important to know how police officers voted on an issue that had a direct impact on the public order policing of that demonstration. I mean, if, for example, a police officer at that meeting had voted along with the Maoists and others who, according to the police, was seeking a fresh confrontation at Grosvenor Square. In other words, they had voted in support of the march going to Grosvenor Square, contrary to the strong views of the leadership of the VSC, who felt very strongly that Grosvenor Square should be avoided on this occasion. And that goes directly to your terms of reference in terms of the conduct of police officers and their participation in decision-making that had a potential direct impact on public order policing. And so, for example, if John Graham had said, which he didn't, I appreciate that, but I didn't know that until I asked the question. Yes, in fact, when I went back to the safe house, we spoke amongst each other, and we discovered that 4 of us had voted one way and 5 of us had voted the other way. That surely would be a relevant matter for your consideration, because it goes completely contrary to Conrad Dixon's penetration of extremist groups document. So that's the sole issue I was trying to explore with that question. There was no mischief involved at all. But I didn't know what his answer was going to be because he hadn't been asked the question. So in my submission, that was a question on a relevant and potentially important matter that could, depending on the answer, have assisted you in your search for the truth. So, I mean, that's my defense, if I can call it that way, to that particular question of that particular witness.
Again, forgive me for interrupting your response, but I did indicate that no harm whatever had been done by that line of questioning. I simply doubted its utility, but that's a matter of opinion between you and me, and I don't think need to delay us any further. Yeah.
Turning then to the third issue, which is clearly in the larger scheme of things, the most important of the 3. I can assure you, sir, that we in my team deliberated long and hard about how to approach this matter, in part because it clearly was sensitive, in part because it clearly was hot off the press, so to speak, and clearly because consideration had to be given as to whether to wait or not and seek to deploy that particular point at a later stage. The difficulty that we found ourselves in was this, that Joan Hillier is the only surviving police officer who was involved in the infiltration of Notting Hill VSC. There are no other witnesses who can speak to that issue. Therefore, a decision was made, again in good faith, that it would be wrong not to explore this matter, of course, with your permission, which you did give me, with the only surviving police officer who could potentially assist on that issue. And that was the basis upon which I made the application. I can assure you it wasn't an easy decision to make. I fully understand and understood at the time the potential implications of asking those questions. But we took the view, Mr. Parry and I, for those we represent, that we would be failing in our professional duty to our clients and failing in our professional duty to assist you in the search of the truth if we did not seek your permission to ask questions about that matter, which I spelt out in some detail when I made the application, and then when you gave me permission to do so, to explore them with the witness. And that effectively is my explanation for what we did. It remains a live issue. I entirely accept what you're saying, that it is now all over the internet, if I can put it that way. And we will consult with your legal team after this particular phase is over as to how best to explore that issue further, if you think it's worth exploring further, in later tranches and phases. But I mean, clearly, I said something to you, sir, when I made the application for permission that led you to allow me to ask the questions that I did. Because clearly what I was exploring, and I tried to do it as carefully as I could without, for example, putting a specific case to the witness, because I couldn't do that. I asked as open-ended questions as I could. But I took the view, and I think you agreed with me, that the issues that I was raising were squarely within the terms of reference of the inquiry. So I'm sorry that it's turned out the way it has, but I'm afraid I do stand by the decision that Mr. Parry and I made. And I think in the circumstances, it was the correct and professional decision to make.
I do not for one moment question the professional propriety of the question or the thought that you gave to it beforehand. However, if and when an issue like that arises in the future, it is, I think, imperative that cards are put on the table to the inquiry lawyers. I'm not suggesting that it needs to be put into the public domain or that advance notification or anything of that kind needs to be given to a witness. But the basis for the questioning needs to be explained and demonstrated to my legal team before the question is raised. Now, because Joan Hillier was giving evidence and because the issue had not been raised before, except in your the questions that you indicated the night before, I think my timing is right. I was confronted with a decision as to whether or not an issue capable of being relevant to the terms of reference of some significance should be explored by you in questioning, which is why I gave you permission. But in future, please, if something like that does happen, it is imperative that the inquiry legal team is told beforehand, not just the questions you want to ask or the topic on which you want to ask questions, but the evidential basis for the questioning.
Yes, I understand. And just finally on this topic, as you've acknowledged, I did, on receipt of the information the evening before, and it was literally the evening before that I came into possession of the information, I drafted specific questions on this topic. I didn't set out the source of that material, I accept, but I set out the specific questions with the specific names of the individuals concerned and emailed them both to solicitor to the inquiry and counsel to the inquiry. And I would have been available if they wished to speak to me about the basis of those questions, to have told them everything that I knew. But I had nobody got in touch with me after I submitted those questions. And I was hoping that obviously those questions would be asked by counsel to the inquiry. When they weren't asked by counsel to the inquiry, I made the application. So, I mean, I hope, but I certainly undertake that if a similar issue arises in future, I will ensure that certainly on our part, better lines of communication are available with your legal team to ensure that we don't have a situation like this arising again.
Thank you. That's all that I can ask, and your response is all that I could hope to receive. Can I deal with late disclosure now?
Yes.
I don't think the outside world, including lawyers for non-state core participants, quite appreciate the problems that in COVID times the inquiry is having with assembling the documents that need to be disclosed so that those such as yourself can read and understand them and participate effectively in the hearings. I'm not going to waste time now explaining what they are, but I ask everybody to accept that they're formidable and they're not within the control of the inquiry. Let me put that differently, not wholly within the control of the inquiry. We do our best to see that the documents are put into a state where they can be disclosed to non-state core participants without infringing the public interest and other considerations. Despite that, I acknowledge that you are bound to be under very great time pressure preparing for hearings. If we're to start, as we now thankfully have, and proceed at a pace which is ultimately acceptable, both to the public, to our sponsors, to everybody who is interested in the outcome of the inquiry, then you may find that you are placed under time pressure in the future. I think that's unavoidable, and we are struggling to avoid it, but we can't do so completely. And I'm afraid that for the hearings, if they take place in March or April of phase 2, the same pressure of time is going to apply. That's something I offer by way, not of consolation, but of explanation. We do know the problems we're putting you under. I'm afraid they're not avoidable, except at the price of endless further delay.
So I understand. I'm sure Ms. Brandon will want to say something on this. Can I just say this before she says what she needs to say? We understand all that, but all we ask is that the inquiry doesn't wait till exactly 4 weeks or 6 weeks before the phase 2 hearings are to begin, before giving us the entire bundle. I mean, we ask the inquiry to, give us material piecemeal as and when it becomes available and as and when suitable redaction has been completed, so that we can start the process. Because if in relation to this tranche, for example, surely there must be material available in relation to phase 2 that can be disclosed, for example, next week. So we can start working on it in December rather than having to wait until February next year before we get the full bundle. But that's all we ask, so that we have maximum time with as much of the paperwork as possible. And if it has to be piecemeal, so be it. We've made this suggestion before directly to your team, so they're well aware of it. And we just hope due consideration can be given to that request for the benefit of all.
Thank you. And just as I have asked you to reflect upon things, you have asked me and my team to reflect upon things, and we will do so.
Thank you.
Ms. Brandon.
So I appreciate you say you don't want to waste time today going into the details, but I think it probably would assist to have a rather fuller explanation from the inquiry, not now, but it can be in writing afterwards, as to precisely what the delays are, because there is a real sense amongst the non-state non-police core participants that they are repeatedly at the bottom of the list in terms of priority for their input, and so they come, as I understand, once it goes through the redaction process, they will be last on the list to receive the material. But last should not mean least and there should be proper recognition of the value of the contribution that the non-state core participants can make when they see the material. And with respect, so I don't think that message is getting through. It seems that not sufficient weight perhaps is being given to the value that the non-state core participants will be able to add once they see the material. And all I can do is to support Mr. Menon and the submission that he's made, that the kinds of difficulties that you have seen in terms of questioning, the reason for my application, which was what I had understood this hearing was to be for, in relation to questioning, arises out of the frustration, the visceral frustration. And I think you probably got some of that from Mr. Smith this morning. And if you have been following social media, you will be well aware of it. That the non-state core participants feel about what they perceive to be their repeated exclusion from the inquiry's proceedings. And a big part of that is not having, for the vast majority of non-state core participants, they don't have access to the material until the witness is giving evidence, and then they have this CFAX transcript, as Mr. Smith has described it. So if they are to provide us with instructions on the material that they are seeing for the first time as it passes by their eyes on the screen, they have virtually no opportunity to feed into the process. And so it's in that context that these last minute difficulties are going to inevitably arise, if there cannot be a greater priority assigned to affording us the materials further in advance so that we can properly prepare, and that we have an opportunity to then discuss with counsel to the inquiry the questions that we are putting in writing in advance, and an opportunity to explain the rationale behind them. Which we have tried to do whenever counsel to the inquiry has come back saying no, they don't want to ask a question. I know Mr. Menon and myself have tried to then provide further explanation, but all of that takes time, and I appreciate that there are pressures on the inquiry, but I would urge that when the timetable is being worked out, that sufficient recognition be given of the value that the non-state side of this inquiry can provide, if only it's given the proper opportunity to do so.
Can I explore a little further with you precisely what it is that you're telling me? As I understand it, there is no complaint about the time that you have for making written Rule 10 submissions to counsel to the inquiry 7 days before we hear the evidence of a witness. I've seen what you've put in, and generally, not always, but generally, you get back the answer yes. And you have kindly acknowledged that counsel to the inquiry has asked the questions that you wanted to have raised in the main, even when the initial answer was no. Is it that part of the process that gives rise to difficulty, or is it the later stage when evidence is given, put out on the rolling transcript, and documents are put up on the screen?
Well, sir, it's at every stage, I'm afraid. So the initial 7-day deadline, as you may be aware, both Mr. Menon and myself have struggled to meet the 7-day deadline simply because we are still trying to get on top of the material, because we received it so shortly before the hearings at the time we were also writing the opening statement. So that's the first difficulty. The second difficulty, of course, at least for my part, is that I am not able to discuss the material with the vast majority of the non-state core participants because they do not have access to the bundle, and so it's subject to a restriction order, so I'm not permitted to discuss it with them. So I'm not able to gather in their concerns. So I can formulate Rule 10 questions on the basis of my understanding of the papers and the understanding of those RLRs within the cooperating group who have access to the bundle. But then there is, because of those time pressures, then very little opportunity for me to discuss with counsel to the inquiry when there has when they've required further clarification. So, for example, I have usually received the response from them saying whether they will or won't ask the questions I've proposed, either the night before the witness is due to give evidence, or more frequently on the morning before the witness is about to give evidence. So I have very little time then to either email or go and try and find counsel to the inquiry to discuss with them why I think some of the questions that they have said they won't ask are nonetheless important. I've had to be extremely selective because there's so little time. So I've chosen perhaps my 2 or 3 most important questions and have provided explanation in relation to those. And you're right, so in relation to those, they have then generally been asked, although perhaps not to the full extent followed up that I have indicated would be desirable in the questions that I've proposed. So that is one branch of the question, of the problem. But the second and very significant aspect is that for the vast majority of non-state court participants, the very first time they will have access to the witness's evidence is as it's rolling past them on the screen. And so I then receive at the end of the day requests through RLRs saying, why wasn't the witness asked about this? And the concrete example is from the women in relationships. As you know, sir, they have repeatedly sought to persuade you, unfortunately unsuccessfully so far, that they have a direct interest in this phase, because although the first known relationship doesn't arise until phase 2, in the case of Rick Gibson, they want to understand where that came from. Did it suddenly spring out of nowhere, or did it emerge? Did it evolve through a culture? Now, we have heard from the evidence of 2 of the officers so far in this phase, and I anticipate that the officer 345, who's being called on Thursday, may have further evidence in relation to this. One officer, John Graham, accepted that he did take a member of the group out for a drink, yes, or he went for dinner, sorry, he went for dinner. And Dick Epps, who we heard from yesterday, had been out for a drink. Now, they both denied having sexual relationships, and I have nothing to suggest that they did. But what the women in relationships are very keen to explore is the extent to which activity of that kind was used to bolster credibility, as Dick Epps had said it was in his case, and to explore the extent to which they discussed it with managers. And you will recall yesterday I was able to put those questions to Mr. Epps because they had been emailed to me by a core participant. But they at the moment have virtually no opportunity to input that kind of questioning because they don't have access to the material in advance. And so that creates a very big problem, which was what prompted my application that I had understood was going to be heard today, which is twofold really. One is that you agree, so or acknowledge that just for the remainder of this phase, given that we don't have time now to have the full-blown procedural hearing that's anticipated after the end of this phase, that in order to mitigate the difficulties that arise out of the non-disclosure of the bundle to core participants and the problems that have arisen with the rolling transcript, that you take the course of agreeing that there will be 10 minutes allowed at the end of there are only 2 remaining witnesses for non-state questioning, which would enable those, such as the women in relationships, to email me during the witness's evidence with the key suggestions for questioning. And that would enable them to feel that they have an identified route by which they can participate and which they can assist you, sir. And I say it's twofold, because one is allowing a recognition that there will be that opportunity, and the second is broadening the scope for questioning, because you have in the past said that you will only permit questioning by lawyers for non-state court participants where the person doing the questioning represents a witness who is directly affected factually by the evidence of the witness being questioned. But this would be a different purpose. This would be exploratory. It would be assisting you, sir, with the themes that go to your terms of reference, drawing on the skills and expertise of those who were subject to similar practices. You heard from Mr. Smith this morning about his level of expertise, ironically recognised by the police themselves, not just in relation to the facts of his particular case, but in terms of the themes that arise through blacklisting. Now, you might think, sir, that he is someone who would be a source of very relevant knowledge and expertise in relation to identifying, questioning, going to the sort of systemic issues that are of key relevance to you. And I would submit that the same goes for many of the core participants, certainly in relation to relationships, the women, certainly in relation to the Black Justice campaigns, the category J families. But those are just examples. And it is why, sir, taking such a restrictive approach to permitting questioning will fetter your ability to get to the truth, because you're not drawing on the expertise that is there to assist you, if you would permit it to do so. And I fully appreciate that you must retain the power, sir, to stop inappropriate questioning. And you've heard from Mr. Menon this morning about the reasons why that occurred, and certainly I will undertake as well to ensure wherever possible that I discuss matters with counsel to the inquiry. But in terms of issues that arise through a witness's evidence, when non-state core participants are receiving that information for the very first time as it flashes past their eyes, then there has to be some scope for feeding in questioning at that stage.
Thank you. You've given me something to reflect upon. I am going to do that, and you will have your answer before close of play today. But would you give me, please, a short time to reflect upon what you say, and if necessary, to discuss it, not necessarily publicly, but privately with counsel to the inquiry.
Certainly, sir.
Mr. Skelton, anything you want to say on this topic?
Yes, please, if I may, sir. So can I address you just briefly on the two topics, essentially, because I think it's both disclosure and witness questioning that's been addressed by Mr. Menon and Ms. Brander.
Yes.
Just on the issue of disclosure, if I may, briefly, I think the MPS recognises the extraordinarily difficult task you and your inquiry have, producing an open bundle about matters which were hitherto secret. Bearing in mind the complexities of that task, both on data protection, privacy, and of course, security and safety of individuals and other public interests. And that task is...
Forgive me for interrupting you, and in particular, where the majority of the bundle doesn't come from directly from police custody.
No, and that is an important point, sir, which leads into my second point, which is that I hope the inquiry recognises that the MPS hasn't improperly delayed the disclosure process. As you will have read in the MPS's written submissions, we emphasise that point, which we think is an important one, because establishing good faith in an inquiry we think is important. And we emphasised it in our oral submissions as well. But I know that Mr. Menon didn't accept that assertion, but I would like the inquiry to at least accept it, that the MPS has done everything it can to ensure that your bundle can be produced, and appreciates the difficulties that you have in completing that process. So the second issue is witness questioning. And I think essentially there are two issues here. One is the specific issue that arose with Mr. Menon's question to the female UCO who gave evidence a few days ago. That I think is a question really of fairness. I appreciate what Mr. Menon said about the background to it and the timing of it, but any question which goes to the heart of an issue which the inquiry is looking at, such as sexual relationships, and is highly contentious, requires careful consideration of what is fair to the witness and the organisations from which she comes. And in this case, of course, it would have been helpful for the witness to have had notice that that question was going to be asked, and to have had the evidence on which it was based. And indeed, one has to be careful allowing any questions where there isn't in fact a factual evidential basis for that question to be put, or at least one which is prepared to come forward, a witness that's prepared to come forward. And so we were disturbed by that line of questioning coming out, as it were, on the hoof for the very first time without any warning, as I'm sure you were, sir, too. And we hope that in future that will not happen, that witnesses will be allowed the time to think about the issue and, if necessary, look at documents again and respond fairly and appropriately as a result. So the more general point that Ms. Brander makes, which was the original subject, I think, of this short hearing today, I've just got three short interrelated points to make on behalf of the MPS. First of all, a point which you yourself, sir, I think said earlier this morning, the inquiry is inquisitorial, not adversarial, and all of the witnesses are called by you and examined by your counsel. And they are questioned in furtherance of your investigations and not in support of a position or case on the part of any of the core participants. So second, and related to that, as you will be aware, Rule 10 of the inquiry rules was brought into force in part as a corrective to the Bloody Sunday inquiry, which was notoriously protracted and expensive, not least because the legal representatives of its participants were given a relatively free rein to ask questions of witnesses. And Rule 10 stops inquiries, particularly those like this inquiry or the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which are highly contentious factually and politically. And so it's now a tried and tested model and has been for many years. The third point really is about the advantages of Rule 10. It encourages witnesses to give free and open evidence, as that they feel that the questioning is independent and neutral and not partisan and hostile. And particularly with elderly witnesses in relation to issues such as this, where they do feel personally under attack and have done for many years, I would like to emphasize that point. That is very important. And as so you will be aware, and certainly the MPS is aware from Operation Motion, many of the witnesses who are giving evidence are extremely nervous and worried about having to talk about things that happened so long ago and about talking about their personal lives. And the consequences for many of them have been serious. That is not to underestimate the consequences for those who also participating in the inquiry who have been the subject of operations. It's just to give a different perspective on that, which is important. So the other point about Rule 10 is that it stops proceedings becoming more polarized than they might already be, because it fairly and mutually disarms all of the advocates in the same way. And in doing so, it's effective and efficient, by which I mean that all relevant topics can be addressed through questions from a single advocate without duplication. And it nevertheless allows court participants to participate effectively in the proceedings by feeding in their topics to your counsel. And when that system operates efficiently, and admittedly that does take a bit of time because there are inevitably teething problems about the timing of the questions coming in and the timing of your counsel indicating whether or not they're prepared to ask the questions or address the topics. But once that settles down, it's difficult to see what additional questions should remain, because your counsel will ask relevant questions. He or she will comb through our lists and ask the relevant questions, and they won't ask the irrelevant ones, and therefore there shouldn't be anything left for anyone else to pick up. And the system, to some extent, is also flexible. Different inquiries, as you'll be aware, operate it differently, from a strict CTI will ask all the questions to a rather more free-for-all approach. But your system, sir, is a hybrid model, if I may put it that way, and it has the flexibility of allowing legal representatives to ask questions, but only in limited circumstances, and in particular where there are significant factual disputes. And where there aren't such significant factual disputes, there really shouldn't be any basis for asking questions, because your counsel should have done the job. And in our view, the exceptions which you have put in force through your procedures balance the interests of fairness of all of us. So in conclusion, I think the MPS recognises, and as do the lawyers representing the MPS, that it can be deeply frustrating for all of the participants attending an inquiry such as this not to have their counsel ask robust questions in furtherance of their interests. And so it's also extremely frustrating for the advocates themselves, who by instinct and training want to further their clients' interests by questioning witnesses directly. But Rule 10 and the procedure you have adopted under Rule 10 has so far proven to operate effectively. And we would say that no one has indicated to you, either in writing so far as we know, or during the hearings or today, that there are any significant questions or topics that have not been asked and covered by your counsel, or could not be asked or could not be covered by your counsel. And so for those reasons, we would say respectfully that at present, as it stands, there's no good reason for you to depart from your procedures. Thank you.
Mr. Sanders.
Thank you, sir. First, I would echo and endorse what Mr. Skelton has just said, and I won't repeat the same points again. It's our position that you should apply the approach set out in advance in your notes of, I think, October and December last year. The proposed approach to Rule 10 was trailed, and it was confirmed in your note of October of this year. So far as we're aware, that model hasn't been the subject of any challenge. And what the model provides is that questioning by other RLRs apart from CTI should be exceptional and only in cases where two criteria are satisfied. So first, that there's a significant dispute of fact between two participants. And secondly, that the witness on the other side of that dispute of fact is willing to give evidence. In terms of the two of my witnesses who've been questioned by other RLRs so far, 328 and 336, those criteria were not satisfied when it came to the questions that were put to them. Both were taken over ground that had already been covered. You've already addressed Mr. Menon today. I would also add that he went on with 328 on Friday without permission to ask questions about the prosecution and the evidence that Helen Crampton had given in a prosecution. You didn't give Mr. Menon permission to put those questions, but nevertheless, he went on to do that. As Mr. Skelton has said, this is an inquisitorial process. My witnesses are assisting your inquiry with their recollections. They're not on trial. None of the witnesses from this week or last week is alleged to have done anything wrong. And they've all, in advance of giving their evidence, have been briefed about the process. So we've explained to them how questioning will run, the order in which it will be done, and the basis on which exceptionally other RLRs will be allowed to ask questions. And it's very unsettling to be told that you will only be asked questions by anyone else if there's a significant dispute of fact, then to have questions put because it's unexpected, and obviously they'll be thinking, what is the significant dispute of fact? In actual fact, in the case of both of those witnesses, there was no significant dispute of fact. I appreciate that all core participants should have an opportunity to participate in the process, but we'd submit very strongly that that opportunity comes via submission of proposed questions to counsel to the inquiry. Departing from the model set out in your note is contrary to the principles underpinning the Rule 10 process. As I've said, it's unsettling to the witnesses who've been briefed on the basis on which such questions might be put. And Mr. Skelton has touched on the fact that a lot of the core participants have very partisan and hostile views. From the perspective of my clients, listening to or following the opening statements that have been made, they have listened to and heard a series of opening statements making very derogatory statements about them, very hostile statements about them, denigrating and vilifying them. in circumstances where they simply feel it's not justified. Now, to then have questions put to them by counsel, and I'm not criticising Mr. Menon, Mr. Randa, anyone else. I appreciate they're representing their clients and those are their clients' concerns. To have questions put to the witnesses by those individuals who've just recently been reading out open statements that are so hostile towards them, bearing in mind that it's an inquisitorial process, is, in my submission, unfair and inappropriate. As regards the suggestion that there would be a free 10-minute opportunity to put any questions, that would be an even greater departure from the approach you've set out in your notes. And in my submission, that too would be unjustified. Finally, sir, when these applications are made, and the first application was made, I think, on Thursday last week, we put a question to your team as to whether or not the RLR for the witness would have an opportunity to respond to the application, and were told no, unless you felt that you needed to hear that. Certainly in relation to the two of my witnesses who've been had questions put to them by others, we would have wished to address you on the appropriateness of that, and to oppose it. Now, we're not given that opportunity, but as a matter of procedural fairness, if this approach is to continue, we submit that we should at least be allowed that opportunity. That's all I have to say. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Barr, I would like to discuss these issues with you privately before making a ruling upon them. Is there anything that you want to say in public at this stage?
So just very briefly, to put things into context, these are early days in our use of this procedure. The procedure we're following is one that's been used in some previous inquiries, but it may be capable of some refinement. It's also important contextually to remember that we are dealing with very early witnesses in circumstances where there are few disputes of fact and few non-state core participants involved. That will change as we proceed through the evidence. We are grateful for the efforts of counsel for the core participants working with us on the Rule 10 procedure. It has many advantages. It's efficient. It can help obtain the best evidence from witnesses. It can avoid delay. It can avoid repetition. It can assist you, sir, with compliance with your duties under Rule 13, notice to witnesses, Rule 17, avoiding unnecessary costs, and Rule 17, procedural fairness. In the context of this inquiry, it can help you to ensure that we don't breach privacy and public interest restrictions, but it is onerous, and we are grateful to all the counsel who've cooperated with this system. We would hope to move to a position whereby we are getting timely proposals in one go in order for us to be able to deal with them and reply to them as soon as we can. I appreciate it's early days, but we were getting multiple iterations in some cases, the last of which were arriving really rather late in some cases. And we appreciate the pressures people work under, but we would like to move to, as I say, a single timely proposal. So, sir, that's what I wish to say.
Mr. Lander, I will, when I discuss the matter with Mr. Barr, tell you the outcome. Would you be available to be present, as it were, on screen at 2:30?
Yes, certainly, sir. So can I be permitted just to respond on one point?
Can I just ask if everybody else can be present then as well? And you may have your your opportunity. If anybody says no, I'm going to take it that everybody will be ready at 2:30.
So I can't, I'm afraid. I have a con out of chambers on Victoria Street. I think it would be a bit late to cancel that. But Mr. McAllister is with me, and I'm sure he can cover it.
Thank you very much.
So I apologise, I probably wasn't clear. I just meant to respond on one point now before you deliberate.
I understand. No,
Oh, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. It was really just that, of course, the process by which the Rule 10 system has been set up is on the understanding that those core participants would have access to the relevant bundle and be able to feed into the process sufficiently in advance. And it is precisely the absence of that which makes the system unfair as it currently is, because those core participants who want to feed in questions that go to the themes that you will be determining aren't able to do so, because the very first time that they see the evidence is as it appears on the screen, and that's why I limited this application to the remaining witnesses in this tranche, because I fully appreciate if the entire system is going to be re-evaluated based on the experience of this this phase, then it may be that the method for questioning will fit in with that as a piece. But if course participants are to be limited only to feeding into the advanced process, then effectively we have both hands tied behind our back, because neither can we ask questions of the witness as they're giving evidence, but neither can those core participants that I represent feed in advance because they haven't had sight of the bundle. So that's the point that I really wanted to draw to your attention.
Thank you. May I now, with you, raise one final topic, and this will be the last that we will deal with before I express my decision at 2:30. It's entirely separate. Before the openings, I was asked by a number of non-state core participants if proceedings could be live streamed to their homes. And I indicated in the case of one, Rosa, that when we get to phase 2, that I would agree to that. I did so on the basis of a long and detailed explanation of both her history and her current and family circumstances, which, as we all know, are exceptional. Quite rightly, those who represent her agreed that the CL and DL teams should see the application unredacted. I then wish to explain to those who were contemplating making applications, and also to the public at large, why exceptionally I was willing to agree to her application for phase 2. I was then asked not to make the detailed basis of her application public. I understood that to be on the grounds that she wished to maintain the right to privacy, which she has, over her personal circumstances and to some extent the history which she would be explaining, I hope, in evidence later. I agreed to that. I was therefore slightly surprised to find that when Ms. Kaufman opened her case for the non-state core participants, including Rosa, that almost word for word, the same detail was compellingly set out by her, as I had been provided with in her application. Is there an explanation for that sequence of events?
Well, sir, I would have to take instructions. I'm afraid I'm not able to give an explanation. It's the first that you've drawn this to my attention. So I would need to take instructions in relation to that. But if I'm able to do so before 2:30, I will.
I'd be grateful if you'd try, and even if you can't do it by 2:30, if some explanation could be given to me at a time when you have been able to take instructions. Because whereas up to now I have accepted what I've been told about personal circumstances of that nature without hesitation, I don't wish to be forced into the position where I have to treat such detail with skepticism. Well,
so be it. So, but I don't understand that there is any doubt about the truth of what Rosa has said. As I understood it, it was simply that that she had not wished to have her personal details disclosed in the context of her application, but then it was set out in her opening statement.
Yes, I'm not talking about the underlying factual assertions, but the application that they should not be made public when I seek to explain the decision which I have made.
I see. So, well, all I can do is to repeat, I will take instructions as to the reason for that.
Thank you. Then can we all be back at 2:30?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We will now take a break and resume at 2:30. Can you all please move to your breakout rooms? Thank you.